On this episode of Behind the Screens, how do you start as a GM for a TTRPG? We're going to give you a crash course, complete with tips, tricks, and our own advice on how you can be the one to lead your group's game to success. This is Masters of Pen and Paper.
DG lead the way. New RPG systems every day. Dice roll, quick adventure calls. Walking through tabletop's golden halls. Masters of pen and paper. RPGs of every flavor. Talking about different creators. The choice of games is never greater. Come with us to games they run through. New, old, and interesting. Thank you all for listening.
Welcome everybody to the show, episode 15. My name is DG, aka Mike. This is my main man.
Finny, what's up, people?
How is it going, everybody? We are at another multiple of 5 episode where we do something called Behind the Screens. So typically the podcast is all about different game systems and we talk about different stuff like that. And then we have to shake it up a little bit. Every now and then we need an episode chucked in here where we just kind of talk the games a little bit, right?
Yeah, it gets a little heavy every now and then.
Yeah.
We just want to relax a little, take a little step back and just chit-chat back and forth a little bit.
Kick back and let you know who we are and the things because we bring to the table a fair amount of experience, right? Like we've been gaming in this regard for well over 20 years at this point, right? Like we've been doing a good amount of TTRPG in some one way or another through different various methods that exist out there. And today we're talking all things Game Master.
Not just that, but first-time Game Master.
First time, yes. And even if you're not a first-time GM, sometimes it's just good to listen to something that to kind of get those juices flowing a little bit. Maybe you need a little bit of inspiration to kind of kick things into high gear to get that game up and onto the table.
And another point of view is always good.
It is, absolutely. And as always, when we do these episodes, we're talking platform agnostic. I have a tendency to lean towards Dungeons and Dragons just because that's like my bread and butter. But these tips and tricks can be used across the board on any of the games. Any of the 14 games we've spoken about in the podcast so far, and any of those games going into the future that we're also talking about as we go forward.
Yeah, 100%. System agnostic. There is no set system here.
No.
It's going to be just generic tips for everyone.
And so basically, you know, every single group that comes together, when you talk about a TTRPG, what makes it a TTRPG is typically that you have somebody running the game. They are a GM, they are a DM, they are whatever they are. And this is a large task. As somebody who's never, ever been a game master before, this is a heavy burden. A lot of people will shy away from this because you're the person in charge here.
It is daunting. And
it is.
I will say that my first time GMing, I was sweating. I
shaking
was
in the boots.
Leading up to it, like an hour and a half before showtime, I'm like, oh God, I need a paper bag.
Breathing into a paper bag. Yes, exactly. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, the other thing
is what it is.
Yeah, and you're going to. It's a heavy task, okay? We accept that right off the bat. But with that same thing being said, I believe that playing as the GM helps you be a better player in the future too. Once you understand what somebody has to go through in order to make the game work, you change a lot of bad habits that you might have at the table as well, because you know what the DM or the GMs had to do in order to bring this game actually out for you.
Well, and not only that, but I find that GMing or running the game is actually very rewarding and enjoyable to play that way. Because, hey, we're playing a game and everybody at the table is playing the game, including the GM. And that means that the GM also has to have fun while playing this game.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Identifying how you have fun, I think is kind of one of the first steps, right? Because I mean, being the GM is actually easier than people will have you believe that it's incredibly difficult, but I think that also depends on the type of person that you are, right? Like if you're somebody who's incredibly analytical and you're strategic, you're probably going to spend a lot of time putting every tiny little bit of detail into that, because you've got to Doctor Strange this situation where you've got to think of every single possible scenario and put that down in order for you to make it. That's when it gets incredibly daunting, incredibly cumbersome.
Yes, and it will. If you are that type of person, I am so sorry.
Rally against what that voice inside.
You're going to have a tough time.
You're going to have a hard go.
Not to say that it's impossible.
No.
Pre-made adventures exist for those people.
Exactly.
It's all laid out. It's all ready to go. You just sit down and run it. Whereas the easygoing, relaxed GM will have a lot easier time coming up with different ways of challenging the group and playing off the group as well, and kind of doing their thing back and forth with the party and the table, because this is a collaboration game.
That's right. Yeah.
It's never GM versus players.
No, definitely not. And I mean, and if you're able to think quickly on your feet, you're going to sit right into that GM seat, no problem. Like that's ideal. You want to be a nice combination of both, in my opinion, right? You need that kind of analytical, strategic bit, but you also need that just kind of think on your feet as well. A lot of the times the players are going to run the game anyways, so you're just kind of along for the ride and helping guide them. Herd the cats into a slightly smaller box than the big box that they're in right now.
Exactly. Yeah. Because everybody, any GM knows that as soon as players hit the mat and roll a dice, there goes all of your plans. Woof, out the window. That's right. Because they're doing their own thing. You can't help it.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and like we mentioned, this is part of a set of episodes where we're going over the nuts and bolts on how to run a game. So we did session 0 was episode 10. If you haven't had a chance to listen to episode 10, make sure you do give that a listen as well. But as we're moving forward here with episode 15, I think the best place to start here, Finn, is what is a GM anyways? What even is this person?
A GM is the person behind the screen, behind the story, not the story, but behind the game. They are the person who plays the part of anybody that is not a player character. So we're talking NPCs, we're talking bad guys, we're talking traps, the king, anything. Everything in between. That big rock over there, that's the GM.
That's right. If it's not a playable character, it's the GM.
That being said, rule 0 is the GM is always right.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's a very simple rule.
Very.
And it states that, or it's a very simple rule, and it should be stated that every GM plays their game different. Mm-hmm. It's not the rules as well. Some of them are going to be rules as written, and that's how it is. Yeah, and
this is what the book says. Page 68, paragraph 3, line number 5. It says that you must do this. Those aren't fun games to play.
Lawyers are awful GMs.
It's not fun games to play in those.
They're not awful. They have their place, and it's not at my table personally.
And I think that is actually a theme to say, is that find your people, right? The GM and the table should merge in a way, right? You need to understand how the players play to be the best GM and ultimately to be the best player that you can be. That it's a symbiotic relationship.
It really is. And it's a symbiotic, collaborative storytelling relationship.
The GM goes by many different names. And we have brought this up in previous games. We're saying GM because that's kind of
we are terrible at this.
So bad at this. But the GM is the de facto default title, let's say. That's the game master. DM,
that's the generic term. Yeah.
DM's the Dungeons and Dragons flavored one, which is the dungeon master. Sometimes referred to as a referee, or my favorite was the Call of Cthulhu, which is the keeper of arcane lore.
Yes. That is such a good title.
It's great. I wish more games leaned into that type of thing. It's just it's so good. But
right.
I love the concept of rule zero, right? The GM is always right. The tables that I typically play at, the rules exist to serve the game. They don't exist to run the game. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right? If the rules as written is great, but as a GM sometimes, and we often do this. I know you have the same kind of concept that I do is rule of cool supersedes actual rules. If it's something that would benefit the story, I'm willing to kind of bend those rules a little bit to make it happen.
In my game, it is rule of cool over any other rule, because we're here, like I say, we're here to have fun. And what's more fun than a warrior jumping through the air and smiting that bad guy on his, in just the last ditch effort to save his companions.
Absolutely.
Like, okay, rule wise, you can't jump and attack at the same time.
Sure.
But that's so cool.
Exactly.
Why would you take that away?
Unless it doesn't make sense for the scenario or something like that.
Exactly.
But I mean, just to add that kind of flavor, and oftentimes we'll call that out too in our games. We'll say, just for flavor, this is what's happening. And then that's kind of the signal out that it's like, I'm not expecting any additional power here. I'm not expecting anything crazy to happen. I simply just want something cool to take place on my turn to add some additional flavor and pizzazz.
This is all done in our mind's eye.
Yeah.
We're not playing video games where we get to see this happen. This is all happening in our heads. So the more descriptors you can put out there, the better the image in that person's head is. And then the whole table about what's happening and what you think that your character's looking like when they're doing that thing. And that's why I like the rule of cool over everything else.
Absolutely.
Now, that's being said, you do have to have a set of rules to keep your stuff in line.
The game only exists because the rules do, right? You have to have something there. They don't have to be heavy, but they do have to exist.
And you're welcome. And I think the first 2 paragraphs of every TTRPG book that I've ever read has said, take these rules. If they aren't working for you, take the ones that aren't working out.
Yep.
Don't play with them.
That's right.
We don't care.
Yep.
Okay. It will still work if you take, that rule out.
Exactly.
Or this rule out. Don't take half the book. No, you got to keep half the book.
We're struggling counting encumbrance. Okay. Encumbrance is now gone. There we go.
That's right.
Now we can move on and play the game. We don't need to get nitty gritty with it. If your table is full of people who like to get nitty gritty with it, then that's a good thing. And you have all those nitty gritty rules you want. Any game that I've ever played in, typically food and drink encumbrance, carrying coins, etc., typically is kind of like, we're not going to worry about that all that much, simply because it's real nickel and dimey, right? And it's easier just to forget about that and move on with the game at a certain point.
It does depend on the type of game.
It does,
you were playing as well.
Yeah, if you're doing a hex crawl survival, you're gonna need those rules in there,
because that brings some agency to everything that's happening too.
For
right?
sure, yeah.
Because if you're in the middle of a hex crawl and you're running out of food, well, that makes a big difference about what you're going to do.
I like the concept of a player character getting popped and being like exploding with loot and coins.
Like a loot goblin.
Like a loot goblin, right? Because you had all this stuff on you and then you died and it was just like poof and out comes all your items and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's really funny. I mean, really what we're getting at is the rule 0, the GM's always right. The next rule would be everybody at the table should be having fun. Whatever fun is described as at your game, everybody at the table should be having fun. Not just the players.
Everybody
the
at
GM
that table
should also be having
GM
fun.
included, because
you're
believe it
also
or not,
someone playing the game.
GMing is playing the game.
You're playing the game.
It's also very fun.
It's very
way
fun
of playing the game,
and you can immediately punish somebody for daring to go against you. What was that? You're challenging me as the GM? Well, fine then. Now you're fighting this, right?
Yeah, that's right. It sounds cliche, but the best way to learn how to GM is to actually sit down and GM.
You got to just do it.
You got to just sit down, bite the bullet, be that person that steps up and says, hey, if we're having trouble getting together a group of players, I'll GM it and done. And then you'll see everybody flock to you.
Yeah.
Because there's a shortage of GMs in the world. There always has been, and there always will be, because nobody wants to put the time and effort into something that might fizzle out later on.
Now, with that being said, that conversation typically goes with, fine, I'll do it then. If no one else wants to, I guess I'll have to. No, I'm just kidding. Some people really love being the GM. I enjoy GMing, but I like 50-50. I don't like to GM all the time. I am not a forever DM. That's not me. But the thing is that if you can choose your table, right? We kind of mentioned this a couple of times, but people who are at the same knowledge level as you, if you are 100% fresh, literally never DM'd a game in your life, in my opinion, you're going to succeed under two scenarios. Scenario one, the players have also never played the game before. So they also don't know what to expect.
That's a blank slate. That is perfect.
Everybody's learning at the same time.
That's right.
Scenario number two, you're playing with some incredibly well-versed veterans sprinkled in with a couple other newbies. And the reason why I think that scenario matters is because the super incredible veterans who have been around, they can tell you, well, this is kind of what the DM does, and this is kind of what I would do in your position, but they respect the DM enough to not say this is what you should do, and instead say, well, if it was my game, I guess I would do this, but that's ultimately your decision. And those little tidbits of advice as you're playing the game help you learn how to actually play. It's like you're getting those tips and tricks on the fly. Super handy. Yeah.
And that's our group is a group that has a lot of experience GMing, and
we've got we've got 7. We've got 7 people in our group. 5 of which are DMs, are
full time,
something like that, right? Like
actually, yes.
I think it's 5 out of 7
have DM'd.
It's insane. And so the thing is that in those games, you have lots of different advice too, right? Yes. Which goes back to rule 0. Rule 0, the GM's always right. You make the call. If you have a table full of people who are telling you this is what you should do, no. You're the person who's in charge. You decide. You can take their advice, but you can also say, thanks, but this is what we're doing instead. And away you go.
I will note that every GM has a different style.
Everybody's different.
Yeah, everybody is different. There's no 2 GMs that are the exact same. Everybody plays their game differently.
Some people,
and everybody sets their game up differently, and everybody does this different. It's just the way it is, and you'll see that when you get your group together, and if you GM a lot, and then one of them, if you can convince them to step up and take the reins while you have a little cool down, they will play different from what you play.
Absolutely.
Even that blank slate group will be totally different after they get in the seat. That's how it goes.
Some GMs are ruthless and they will destroy players. They seek out to destroy players. Some GMs are like pushovers and everybody always wins at their table. And then the rest are like a combination in the middle somewhere.
Right? They deal with consequences. Here's your consequence.
Exactly. So as far as it goes to like getting started, right? You don't need every single thing right off the bat. You likely are being a GM and you're either panicking and searching out on YouTube or Google, how do I DM? What are the things that I need? And people are going to tell you like, oh, you need to have miniatures and you need to have dice and you need to have maps and you need to have this, and you need to have that. You don't need all of that. You can do very well with a pencil, a pack of grid paper, and you do need a set of dice. You have to have a set of dice. That you got to have a set of dice. Sorry. With that being said, you can download a dice app on your phone and roll the dice there. It's not going to be as satisfying
100%.
As rolling real dice. But you could do it in a pinch if you had to.
I would dare say that only the GM needs the grid paper.
Yeah.
And it's like, and the 8.5 by 11 grid paper.
Yeah,
We
you don't need the big stuff.
sheaf.
Nope.
And the rest of it's theater of the mind.
That's right.
And character sheets. Your characters should have character sheets. But that's it. That's all you need.
Pretty low key. Now, if you did want to buy a couple things, you can get those dry erase flip mat covers.
The flip mats,
right?
yep.
Those things are super handy. They're very versatile. With a set of dry erase markers, you kind of have endless maps, and then you can use miniatures from there. I've seen a lot of people print out the tokens and use paper tokens for monsters, but you could also use pennies, gummy bears, chocolate chips.
Dice.
You can do anything.
The bad dice.
Right?
The bad dice that don't roll good.
Yeah, you don't need to spend lots of money. I think that's really important, right? You can spend as much as you feel comfortable to spend, which if that's zero, you can still play. You're still perfectly fine. Don't worry about all of that stuff. Not a big deal.
We have actually covered $0 games in this podcast, and you can sit down and play for free with nothing.
We were literally just talked about lasers and feelings and World of Dungeons in the last episode. You go and raid the Monopoly game for their 2d6, and boom, there you go. You got yourself a TTRPG.
And you grab some scrap paper, you write down in lasers and feelings, you write down your one stat number.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
And you roll off that.
Yep. Very basic stuff. So, I mean, the barrier to entry is low. And it's only as high as you make it. But don't worry about the folks that are going to tell you have to go and buy all of this stuff in order to make it happen. You do not need any of that.
Yes, it looks pretty and it is nice, but you don't need it. I prefer theater of the mind for a lot of stuff. The only thing that I like or grid paper for is combat for miniatures. But even that, you can still work your way
through. If you're planning on playing Dungeons and Dragons, it is designed to use current edition is designed to use grid paper for like battle mats and stuff. So, as far as it goes for collecting information on how to DM, I mean, obviously you found us, so there's
good job. Way
to go.
You'll know everything by the end of this.
You're good to go. But if you needed some other stuff, I mean, you're in the age of internet, right? You've got all this information at your fingertips. It's not like it was back in the 70s and 80s and really into the 90s where you had to rely on, magazines and letters to the editor and like word of mouth.
Yeah, Chuck down four blocks away that ran the one dungeon, 7 days ago that killed half the party. No, you don't need that.
No, there's resources.
You can do a quick Google search. Will find you more videos and content than you could ever hope to get through in your life. For sure.
I would recommend, if you're on YouTube, Matt Colville's got a set of videos called Running the Game, which is basically it's designed for everybody, but it is to the point of the GM, like helping GMs understand how to do the GM things. And he's a very well-spoken individual. He knows his stuff. He's been playing since the early 80s.
He does a very good job.
Very good job. So if you are looking for a recommendation, I would recommend that set of videos to you. It's on YouTube. Just search Matt Colville. It'll come up, guaranteed. 100%.
Yeah.
As far as it goes for the DM, your job is here's where I'm gonna talk unfortunate circles a little bit, but your job is not to be the storyteller. Kind of. And what I
to a point.
Yeah, to a point. What I mean by that is you're the referee, you're the monster keeper, you play the NPCs, right? You set the stage, but the players tell the story. You don't tell the story, the players tell the story. You simply give them the theater information, right? Enter stage right. A person is standing here, do. This is what they say. What do you do? And the players tell the story. Your job is simply to collect that and keep the ball rolling.
Yes.
It's important that you understand this because you may be coming to the DM role after watching something like Critical Role and watching Matt Mercer at work.
I am sorry if you do. Because
he's phenomenal.
those are giant shoes that nobody can fill.
But it's like saying that you drive a race car when you're in a soapbox derby. You know?
Yeah.
Like
it is very
it's different from F1 racing.
Very different.
Right? It's really important that you understand that your job is not, unless, and again, I'm going to go back to what we just said, it depends on the table. If the table expects you to do that, and that's why you've taken the role of GM, different story. But I would think that those are few and far between, right? It's important that you understand your job isn't to set the stage in the way of the sun breaks on the morning dew as the grass shimmers across the plains. A tall elf stands in the distance with long blonde hair blowing in the wind. He calls out to you. No. You know, like these 45-minute monologues from the GM.
You wake up, you roll out of your tent, you look over to the hill, and there's an elf standing over there.
Yeah,
done.
That's what you do, and it's always it ends with a question.
That's how 90% of GMs are going to do that.
It ends with a question. What do you do? Right?
Yes.
And then the players are the ones that decide, like, oh, wow, what's that guy standing there? What does he look? They're going to ask you a bunch of questions. What does he look like? What is he wearing? Does he look menacing? Is he brandishing a weapon? Is he just looking at us? Is he holding something?
Is he alone?
Right? So that's your job. The GM is going to, in turn, answer these questions and move the story along that way. It's unlikely that you're going to be in the type of game that is that level of real theatrical voice acting, big giant game, because it's not fun for everybody. For the players who are sitting there for the 30 minutes while you run through your speech, not a lot of fun there.
It's a lot of production hoo-ha for that stuff.
And I am not knocking Critical Role. I am simply stating that isn't the default D&D experience. That is the D&D experience of that style of game. That is a perfect example of be the DM for the table. Because the people around the table, that's what they do too. They are also actors. Right?
They are also actors. Yeah. There's a lot of acting talent in that room at that time when they are recording that.
Exactly. It's about collaboration more than anything.
Yes.
That's what you're doing. We mentioned it before. The GM works with the players, not for them.
I can't understate how many questions the GM actually answers per session. Like,
you're going to get peppered with questions.
It is a constant back and forth between the GM and the party about what's this look like? What's that look like? What's this? Is it locked? Is it open? Is it made out of stone? Is it... Holy cow, guys. Just... it's like 21,000 questions.
Absolutely. And that's a mark of a healthy game, right? Because you've got players who are interested in your world and that are willing to interact with it, right? Rather than just waiting to be told what to do.
Yes.
So that's a good example of the players actually running the game. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions and then they're going to make a decision. Okay, if the elf is by himself and he's just standing there, he's not brandishing a weapon, I'm going to call out to him, hey, elf, what are you doing out there? And then the DM would say, this is what he responds with. And you would then get an opportunity to continue. The DM's job is not to say he walks over to you, blah, 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 blah. And then for 20 minutes explain how the player is and then say, okay, well, hang on a second, because your character is a tiefling. He's very interested in tieflings. And so you as a tiefling, you would say this and now I just took control of your character. And did everything for you, and you just kind of get to sit and watch the TV show at this point.
And that's what we call removing player agency.
Mm-hmm.
Player agency is the player playing their character.
That's right.
Otherwise, they are just watching a production.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's why they are there to play a game, not watch a play.
That's right.
And this turns into taking away player agency into railroading, which is not a cool thing.
Railroading is really bad.
It has its place.
Yeah.
And it's usually on minecarts underneath them. going down the mine. No.
Sometimes it's important to have railroading in a campaign in areas where you must push the story forward in a specific way, but it is you're threading a needle in this regard, right? Because railroading is typically referred to as the concept of giving your players a choice, the illusion of choice, but taking the choice away from them, i.e. saying you can go right or you can go left. And they go, okay, we're going to go right. And it's like, okay, you go right and you end up at Blue Green City. And they're like, okay, actually, we're going to turn around and go the other direction instead. And they're like, okay, you turn around, you go the other direction, and you end up at Blue Green City.
Yeah.
Right? It's forcing your players into a specific path by giving them either the illusion of choice or just forcing them to do it and saying, no, this is what you have to do now. Player agency is important to keep sacred at all times.
There are games like that need certain...
Sometimes you have to have it.
So players are like cats. They are very hard to, funnel down a corridor without them, wandering off in every single direction.
Yep.
You have to... GMing's really difficult because of that, because everybody wants to do everything all at once.
Somebody always has to be the joker in the group as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you do have to put bumpers on the side of the road
of the
for
bowling
these people
alley
because they will just wander off and do nothing.
That's right.
At all.
Yeah.
So you do have to sometimes not force them, but push them in a certain direction that keeps them going that way, the way that the story will progress from there. Yeah.
I find that some of the most satisfying ways of railroading players is by giving them quest lines and being specific about that, right? Because you're not railroading them in the sense that you're telling them what to do, but you're essentially saying you've got options A, B, and C that you can take care of. Which one would you like to take care of? The players may go instead, we don't like options A, B, and C. We would rather do this instead. We'd rather do Z instead. Okay, but in those instances, if you as the DM, you're not able to work that out with your players, that's where you may have to invoke a little bit of like, well, that's not really the type of game that we're playing here. And then you go back to your session 0 information that you had set out before and make it clear that this is the type of game that we're playing. We're not playing the game where the players roll into town and destroy every single person that's in it. No. That's not the game that we're playing, right? So that type of railroading, in my opinion, I think that's okay. It's the type that a player wants to do something and you say, no, you can't do that because we have to do this instead. And you force them to do something. Not cool. Don't do that.
Please don't do that.
Don't do that.
On the same note, every now and then the GM might have to, quote unquote, take control of your character or a character. And this is them explaining, hey, this happens to your character. Hopefully they don't go, this is what your character says in response to that, because all of a sudden we're way back at the beginning where we've lost player agency.
That's right.
And we're watching a production again. Yeah.
Set the stage, don't set the response.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the player is there to play their character.
That's right.
And their character usually has a set of beliefs and flaws and stuff that is integral to that character that they want to bring out in their character, that they know intimately about their character. So they would know how to respond in that character, right?
No, exactly. The other thing is it's incredibly important at all times that you keep these things light and loose, right? We mentioned a little bit earlier about this, but you got to be ready to move with the players because it's going to make the game better. In the example of giving them quests A, B, and C, and they go, okay, we're going to do quest A. You can't be like, well, Quest A is not really ready, so you gotta pick B or C. No. Then you just give them B or C, right? Like, you gotta be ready to move with the players. If they choose option A has to be ready, and you need to be able to work down that pathway. Because they're the ones leading the game. It may look like the GM's the one running the game, but you're actually just kind of ensuring that everything keeps moving forward. You're setting the scene, they're the ones responding.
My favorite thing to do in that situation is take what I wanted to do and let them go down path C or path A, whichever one, and make it happen at the end of that anyway.
That's right. You can always loop it back around as long as it makes sense.
Because none of this is set in stone. You can move pieces around. Like, you can move where your quest ends.
Yeah, it makes
around in there.
It gets to a point where things can be modular. As long as it's not, like we mentioned before, where you go right and you end up at option A, and you go left and you end up at option A. It should be right to option A, left to option B, and if option A comes after B, then so be it. That's not a problem.
Exactly.
You can still make that happen, but keep the players in a state of their own player agency. They decided this is what happened, and based on their actions, these things then transpired after it. Super important. I think it's time that we should kind of branch away. So that's the basic, that's a generic advice. But
DG and I could talk about
we could
that
talk
stuff
about all day long. No
all
sweat.
day.
But where do we go after this, Finny? What's the next step? We're now with the GM. We've got an understanding basically how it works. What do I do next?
We have to pick a system. Because, hey,
you need to know what game to play.
There.
It's important to know there is a lot of games. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know there's lots of games out there that you can play.
There are. And they aren't just limited to Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. Right?
You want to do some space games? Do some space games. Play some Traveler.
Do space games. Yeah. Pick up Doctor Who. I mean, whatever you want, right? Make sure you are interested in this system, because it's really hard to pitch something to your players as, hey, we should play this system if you aren't interested in it and running it at all.
That's right.
It makes it really difficult to run a game that you are not interested in running.
As the GM, it's incredibly important that you are you're essentially the ambassador for the game at this point, because you're going to be the person who knows all the rules. And not necessarily memorizes the rules, but you're going to have access to all the rules. The players might not.
That's the next step I was going to get at, was know the basics of the system before you pitch it to your party. Because if you say, hey, let's go run Traveler, and they're like, what's Traveler? Okay. It's a space game.
I mean, that's not a lie. But it's also a very bad description of it. If it sounded something like, let's play Traveler. Well, what's Traveler? It's this role-playing game where we play explorers that go through their entire life of exploring, and you actually jump in after they've become an adult and grew up in these systems. And we have crazy space adventures that could end in our absolute destruction.
Well, or live long and prosper after that.
That's possible. It's unlikely.
But you're going to have a better chance of pitching that to your players. Sell them on the good things. That,
yeah,
right?
Sell them on the good things. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's what we're getting at. Get something that you're interested in. And if you are interested and passionate about it, gosh darn, I think 9 times out of 10, your players will be good with you playing it, right?
Be ready to DM Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Lots of people want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Many people have never heard of Traveler. Many people have never heard of Dungeon Crawl Classics. Many people have not heard of Merkborg, right? So be ready to DM Dungeons and Dragons. But the best part is once you've reached the end of your Dungeons and Dragons campaign, that's your opportunity to be like, hey, why don't we switch the game system up a little bit here and try this cool new game that I found called Merkborg? It's super cool. Why don't we try this little game called Paranoia? It's super cool.
Yeah, and your players will hopefully say, "That's cool. What is it?" And
there it is.
There
you got
go.
them.
Yeah,
hook, line, and sinker. You got them.
Especially if you slap that Merkboard book down.
I mean, and that's the thing. Once you find a system that interests you and you've got them on the hook with you as well, that's your opportunity then at that point to go through the game, get things set up. If we go through this route, Finn, what are our thoughts on pre-made adventures then?
If I were
a first-time GM,
which I was, I ran the pre-made.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
I didn't have the tool set that I needed in my GMing repertoire to make a homebrew adventure.
Yep.
It's not something that everybody can do.
No, it's hard.
Some people cannot make homebrew adventures. It is difficult. Now, that being said, it is extremely rewarding.
I think everybody can make a homebrew world. Not everybody can make a successful or playable homebrew world.
Yes.
Everyone can make up their own fantasy land, but as soon as you land there, if there's no quests or things are broken in this fantasy land, people are going to bail real quick.
Yes.
And if you want the ultimate path to set yourself up for success as a first-time GM, that's why pre-mades exist, is because they take that work. They take a workout for you.
They are curated by the employees that make this game,
mm-hmm.
and they make a fairly every pre-made that I've ever run or have played has been a very well done
mm-hmm.
little adventure.
Yep.
Now I'm talking anywhere from one shots to level 1 to 20.
Yep.
Huge campaigns. They are all very well done, and they are balanced for the most part. Some of them are not the best balanced, but that's what you get.
That's what it is. And I mean, and there are official pre-mades and unofficial pre-mades too, right? So
yes.
like Dungeons
and
Dragons
third parties
releases their own stuff, but then you can get pre-mades from places like Drive-Thru-RPG or the DM's Guild or any of these other spaces on the internet that exist, where like for a couple bucks you buy yourself a pre-made and boom, you're off and running, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's always buyer beware. Some of the pre-mades are better than others. Some contain more stuff.
Some of them are snooze fest.
Read through them a little bit, and if it's online, you can check out the reviews. They'll tell you real people will give reviews and tell you what they think as well.
You type the adventure into Reddit or Google,
mm-hmm.
and the Reddit people are brutally honest.
That's right. You'll get best. Information. That's exactly it.
You'll know how that's balanced, how it works. Everything up to the very end of it, and it is what it is.
It is. And I mean, the thing is that oftentimes what ends up happening is GMs kind of set out and they're like, I'm going to make my own world. And if you're the creative type and that's not like a heavy lift, then I think you should just go for it. That's fantastic. Way to go. Way to have an imagination. But sometimes you need that work done before you actually get into the game. And in order to run the best possible game, it's nice to be able to look into a book and have it say, this is what you should be getting your players to do. This is what they should be aiming at. Here is the big bad of the adventure. This is what's going on. Here's a map. Here's the monsters. Here's the information. And it literally just lays it all out for you. You don't have to build all of that yourself.
I will say Pathfinders, like Paizo's big adventures, are notoriously bad for continuity.
Right?
Because they're split up into 3 to 6 books, and each book is done by a different author.
Of course.
And they're playing off of the backstory of that one, and the groundwork hasn't been set in the previous book, but they set it up in the next book. It's a hot mess.
Come on, Paizo.
Can work.
Come on, Paizo.
That's why you read through the whole adventure to figure out what is actually happening behind the scenes, so you can dabble a little bit of crumbs for your party to find as they go through.
Totally. And I mean, we've done games that have pre-built adventures as part of the book themselves. Like, look at Merkborg and Pirateborg, for example, right?
Yeah.
There are very good first-time adventures in these rules books that you can start off with. So, I mean, it takes the pressure off and gives you the ability to learn how to DM, learn the game, and get an adventure all in one little package. It takes that pressure off.
Yes, it does. And you have a lot of pressure on you already as the GM.
So I think we've scared off the people who were going to create a world that weren't ready for it. But now we've got folks that are like, okay, Finny, DG, I'm ready to make my own world. I've done a couple pre-mades. I'm ready to go. How do I homebrew this thing?
Take a seat, young one. We're about to teach you. No. We're gonna lay some basic groundwork for you here. Some little tips and tricks that we've found building our own stuff, because God knows analysis paralysis kicks in and you're just going haywire with building cities, right?
Exactly. One of the biggest pieces of advice I have for you is, while you're playing the game, either as a player or as a DM, even if you're out and about in the world, keep a notebook either on your mobile device or on your person in one way, shape, or form, and write down ideas as they come up. They don't have to be great ideas, but just keep a collection of them. Map concepts, ideas for games, monsters, treasure, whatever. And throughout the day, as you think of these things, you add them to that list. It is insane the amount of times I consult these lists that I have for different things where I'm writing something out and I'm like, you know what? I need a different kind of treasure here. What do I got? I want a cursed item. I'll just consult my cursed items list, and there's a good one, and I'll put it in. Done.
Yeah.
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
I don't have to sit and think about it.
Having lists of ideas that you can draw off is huge for creating your own adventures.
Absolutely.
Because to sit down and write, because it's basically you're writing a story.
You're writing
right?
a story, and you can get bad writer's block if you have to think of something on the fly and you don't have easy access to it.
Exactly. I know. I tend to do a lot of my thinking when I'm working, and pull out the phone quick, punch that in, even text it myself.
Yep.
Because I'll forget,
Emails.
and then I can come home and put it into my notebook or whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, and then you take those ideas, you make your homebrew out of it, and it makes it so easy. You just grab, a little mini dungeon, perfect. I'll slot that in right there. Perfect.
Exactly.
That's what this all does. And then you can use that to even fluff out your pre-made adventure.
Yeah.
If you wanted to take a stab at, going off the rails and taking your party on a little adventure off the side, even if it's like, a mini dungeon, like I said, it's 2 levels. Down at the bottom, there's a long lost treasure that the so-and-so has asked you to go get. Perfect. Done. So you can go get half a level to your players and come back. Done. And they probably get a sweet reward for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Some of my absolute earliest homebrew is literally just that. We did a pre-made. We completed the pre-made. And then we started linking to the next pre-made, and I wrote the link between pre-made A and pre-made B and got the players over into this one here because they weren't like in the exact same world. That's all it takes sometimes. Start small. You do not need to do everything in one shot. Linking
one shots is so cool.
It's awesome.
You can take one shot. One shots, we'll explain this, is it's a
self-contained
a small self-contained adventure that you can typically knock out in about 4 hours. One session,
give or take.
Yeah. They say 1 session. Now that
Depending
depends on
your
your
party.
session, because
Is your party
I've
somebody
run-
who likes to inspect every tiny little square inch of every tiny little thing? It might take longer than 4 hours.
every one shot I have played and GM'd has taken at least 6 sessions to
Yep.
play.
Huge.
Like
Huge.
12 hours. It's just because that's the way our party is. Our parties like to explore and ask about certain things and inspect this and inspect that and hum and haw and do this and that.
We
right?
get crunchy
And
with things.
It is what it is.
That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Now, speaking of homebrew adventures, keep your world small to start with.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking minuscule.
Yep.
You don't need 7 continents with 30 different countries, with 30 unique cities in each country,
Nope.
and 15 different factions spread across the globe. No. Stick to a single region, a major city, a couple minor towns.
Yeah, what's your
at
start?
most.
What's your starting zone? That's what you
And
should
then-
be considering.
If your players want to be from, if their backstory says, I'm from such and such a place and whatnot, okay, come up with that name.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take that pin and I'll put that here.
Yeah,
And
write it
we'll
in.
get back to that afterwards when I need to expand my world. I'll put that place in for you so that you can be from an actual place in my world. But for now, you're just an imaginary place in this pin right here.
Yep.
And that's all you got to do. Don't make a huge world.
The amount
it is
of
daunting.
the amount
It
of
is-
GMs that have the phrase "I'm not ready because my world hasn't been fully built yet," and they just never get it built. It's just perpetually being built because you're literally building a world, right? Like this isn't something that's going to come together overnight. We're not saying do minimal effort here. You should have an idea based on what it is that you're doing in the concept of your campaign.
Yeah.
You should have a loose chain of events. This is kind of what happens. Then this might happen. Then this. Then this. It might not happen in that order. It might not even happen in front of the quote camera itself. But this is going to be what helps you keep it on track. And then you can just simply create those pins on the map for when the players one day eventually get to it. And it could be blank space in between.
Since we had talked about Matt Mercer, I saw his binder for Tal'Dorei.
Oh, yeah.
That thing, so he's got like a 4-inch binder
Yep.
stuffed. It's exploding of information on the districts of the city of Taldor. Like, holy cow, this man has gone through a lot of work.
Yep.
Now, when you create your first city, make it a page long. you don't need
you
a
could
lot.
have a paragraph, really.
You don't need a lot.
You need, it's the same basic concept. And to be perfectly frank, I wouldn't start, if it was me, I wouldn't start with a city. I would start with a village. I would start with some kind of starting village. And it would be the name of the village, the rough basic size, and a village is small. We're talking like 50 people live here, 50 to 100 people live here. It has a pub of some kind. It has a general store of some kind. It might have a horse and tack shop. It might have some kind of area for a priest, some kind of sanctum of some kind. It's got some paths and roads and a couple of small houses, and that's it.
Yep.
Real,
That's all you
real basic. It should be near some kind of water, whether it be a river, a creek, a lake, etc., because a village needs water to survive. It should have some kind of local wildlife in the area for people to eat, whether it is animals or whether they're farming land, etc. And these little details, you can easily just kind of write them down as you go, because all the little villages need the same basic checkboxes. And at that point, you give it that title, you plop your players into it, and you let your players go from there. You put a couple basic landmarks somewhere around. You write in a city. There is a city. It's off this far off into the distance, but you don't actually need to build it yet. You just have to have it on the map somewhere that the players will one day want to get to. And that buys you plenty of time to add those details in as you guys go along. Because stuff's going to happen where you're going to say, oh, yeah, that person's from this city. They're here as an emissary. They want you to attend the king's crowning today. And away you go.
When you build these big cities and stuff and regions in general, you don't need 1,000 years of history. Nope. Players don't care if a king was assassinated 500 years ago, if it's not relevant to the story or any quest. They don't care.
If the quest is to find out how the king got assassinated 500 years ago, now it's relevant. But now pretty much in every other scenario, it's just basic lore that the players are probably not going to write down anyways.
Even if you tell them, they won't. They don't care. 90% of it doesn't come out anyway. Now, that being said, you also don't need a huge pantheon.
Nope.
And the pantheon is like your group of gods that govern everything. Now, if you have a holy person in your party, you should probably work with them to figure out what kind of god they worship and how all their powers show up and all that stuff. And then probably an opposite god to be warring against because, hey, wars of gods is always fun.
This is an opportunity. If this is cumbersome, if this is like too much for you to take care of, this is an opportunity for you to take advantage of other existing settings like the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or these other areas that may already exist where you can borrow their history, their pantheons, their cities, and you can just simply create your own village and plop it down in the middle of that countryside.
There's nothing stopping you.
You can still homebrew based on an existing setting. In fact, if you haven't built your own setting before, this is probably a good way to go to get you to understand all the different moving parts that might exist in it, so that in that notepad that you have on the side, you simply just take your notes down for your setting that you're building, and then eventually one day create that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would do that first. Yes. I would take a pre-existing setting with pre-existing cities and stuff and plot my little homebrew region into the middle of it and be like, okay, here's roughly where we are.
And when we zoom out, this is what you see, right? We're zoomed right in on this village, and then that's the concept of zooming out, zooming out, zooming out, zooming out.
Now, zooming out, please make sure you have a single overarching story to your adventure that you are homebrewing. Because if you do not, if you are playing a sandbox and you're just trying to see where your players go and what they're going to do, it's going to burn out real quick.
You're going to have a rough go if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah.
Because if you don't know what you're doing, it's really hard to run that game and push your players that direction.
Things go off the rails really fast in that kind of a game. And it ends up just not being fun, right? I completely agree. You need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This does not mean that you need to say to the players, first you go here, then you go here, then you go here. That's railroading. We talked about that earlier. Don't do that. What we're saying is you need to have a start. This is how we begin where you are today. You need to have a middle, somewhere where the players are going to get to, where the story is going to change. And it's like writing a book. You're going to have a climax of some kind, and then you're going to conclude your story in some way. Yeah. But the events that happen in between these key points, and that's how I write my campaigns. I write it as in chapters, right? Chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, all the way to the end. But what actually happens, the pages within that chapter, they're blank. They don't exist. The players are the one who writes the pages for the chapters. The chapter simply just suits the overarching storyline of the campaign that we're doing. This is the rough idea what the players need to do. You guys decide how that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if it's just the GM telling the players what they're doing, it's a production and it's boring and nobody wants that.
And
they're here to play and make choices.
If it's just the players telling the GM what they're doing with no guidance, the GM's not having a fun time, and we're still not at a point where everybody's happy.
Yeah.
So make sure that everybody at the table's having a fun time.
Yeah, that's
it. That's
about it.
GMing in a nutshell, really, right? I mean,
We've glossed over a lot.
Oh yeah, it gets super crunchy. Each game's got their own dungeon master, game master type rules, right? So you're going to refer to the platform of your choice, refer and read the DM, the GM, the referee, the keeper of arcane secrets, read the rule set that exists for the game that you're playing, and read it again and read it again and read it again until you have a really good understanding of how that game works. That's where the referee component comes into the picture.
The good thing about that is that this will be a system that you are interested in running. So it's not going to be like reading a textbook in school. You know, open it up and page after page. And, oh my God, is this ever going to end? I mean, yeah. Call of Cthulhu has a 400-page keeper's manual, and it is a hefty tome because there is a lot to crunch there. But if you are extremely interested in it, it becomes a lot easier to read.
Exactly. A lot of people, too, will just tag the relevant areas in their books, right? You get those little like page flags that you can get. I mean, that's another way to go about it, too. We are not saying you need to memorize that rule book. You are not going to memorize all of the rules in the rule book. You're going to need to refer to the rule book at different points in the game. You're probably, in order to keep the game flowing, you might just make a call and then come back to it later. But either way, you're going to go back into that book. It's a good idea to make sure you know where stuff is within it so that you can either grab it at a moment's notice and get to it real quick or be able to look it up after the fact.
I would say at your table, as you're running, have a little notepad off to the side for things that you're supposed to look up after the game. Just certain rulings that you're like, I don't know if that was quite right, but we made the call because, hey, we're kind of on a time crunch and nobody wants to sit and read through the book for 15 minutes while mid-combat, while something's happening. No, make a call, have it done, write it down in your little sketch pad here. Okay, after the game, we'll flip through the book, read the rule, and see how it's actually supposed to be done.
We're halting the 25-minute argument about whether or not the monster was grappled in 3.5 edition. We're halting it in its tracks and saying, you know what, they're grappled, and we're moving on.
Unless you and the rules lawyer are getting it out in the table, and then everybody's not going to be having fun.
And then the GM simply taps his sign that says Rule 0, the GM's always right. Don't make me tap the sign, he says.
That's right. But have fun with it, though.
Yeah, enjoy.
It is incredibly rewarding and fun being a GM.
Yeah,
I do enjoy my times GMing.
The GM is also playing the game. It's important that you are also having fun.
That's right. That is rule after number 0.
Rule
number 1.
Rule number 1. Finny, it is time once again for the post-pod. Post-pod. Time for the post-pod.
It's something.
I haven't heard back from that professional musician. I'm going to have to send him another message. This is fun, though. I gotta say, this a cappella thing. I dig it. Finny, today's post-pod question comes to us by me. And the post-pod is, how important is it that you create a detailed background for your characters? How important to you is it that you have a detailed background for your characters?
Oh, to me, okay, because
I mean, you can speak on the whole if you'd like, but I mean, this is to you. This is your own opinion.
I'm a real bad guy to answer this because my character backstories are non-existent. Typically. The only one that I went all out was the game that you GM'd for me.
Okay.
Zazid had a hefty backstory.
Zazid had a great backstory.
That was the new character that I made, and unfortunately did not get a backstory. Neither did the one before that or the one before that. But
so your backstory just it's interesting to you, but it's not that interesting, or what?
I want to have backstories for my characters. I never end up with the time to make a backstory for my characters.
So your backstories are more like they're known by you and you kind of work through them, but they're not necessarily something that you write out and hand in.
Yeah, I'm awful for it because I need like months and months of notice to make a character and then create a backstory, because my backstories have to fit my character. If they don't fit that character, I can't use that. And then they become generic, Artificer 1.
Fair.
Now, that being said, I feel that it is fairly important for you to have a backstory for your character, for you to know where your character came from and what they have been doing all this time up until they became your character. That's builds, and it gives the character, it fleshes them out and it gives them personality. Otherwise, they're you self-inserted into a game, and that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you do it too many characters in a row, it's going to get old.
Right.
It's nice to have, especially you and I have had so many characters.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
If we were to sit and play the same character, only this guy, instead of swinging a sword this time, he shoots magic bolts this time, or he shoots a bow and arrow now, it's not fun. I want a character that has a flaw. I want my character to have something that's different about them, something that stands out.
Sure.
And makes that character memorable to me, let alone just the party that I'm playing with.
Mm-hmm. You don't want a generic player. I'm very much a character background writer. All of my characters have backgrounds. Now, with that being said, I am not the type of person who creates a character with a background story and then gives it to the DM and expects the DM to integrate that into their story. Even though they typically do, I write the background for my characters simply to help me get into character, almost, so to speak, right? I need to know what makes this character tick in order to understand what type of character they are, right? And I've played a myriad of different characters, ranging from the very nice, the super nice, never wanting to hurt anybody, to like full-fledged, just like, I stick to the law. This paladin follows the rules, and that person will die because they broke the rules, and that's how it works, right? I love writing background stories. Now, I've always enjoyed writing too, so that just kind of comes with me as a person. But I agree with what you said. If the character doesn't have a background and they're simply just created, this is where you get the people who go onto the internet and type, what is the best D&D character? And that's the character that gets spit out. There is no life into that character. It's simply just a min-maxed, top of the line, best action,
quote unquote.
Yeah, and
we're doing air quotes right now.
Yeah, and the thing is that the best character ever is in that person's opinion, in that person's game. Every game is different, so there is no such thing as this is the best character. There's different characters that could be better than others, but it depends on how the game works, right? And so for me, the backstory and the background is what sets those characters apart from each other. It's what makes my fighter different from your fighter. Your fighter might use a sword and shield. My fighter might use a sword and shield. But your fighter grew up in a kingdom and was trained by the king and all the best trainers in the land. And my person was a arena fighter and came up from nothing.
My characters are usually nobles. Yeah.
Our characters are wildly different at this point, because yours expects one thing and mine expects something else. And that's how we get the best possible RP in our game as well, because I can now tap into that to make sure that when my character is asked a question, they answer something with that information in mind.
Yeah, that's 100% a good answer.
I love
that's-
writing backgrounds for characters. I've got many different characters created with backgrounds to them that'll probably never see the light of day, just because that's just how it works. And both of us enjoy just creating characters for fun.
I love just spitting out characters. They're fun.
That's it. That's all. Episode 15 in the bank. I want to thank each and every one of you for choosing this podcast to listen to. With your support, it helps us gain additional followers and grow on the ranking systems. If you want to help us out, all you need to do is just let people know that the podcast is out there. Send the link to folks. Let them know that Masters of Pen and Paper is a podcast that's out there. And send it to people who are aspiring GMs and let them know, hey, there's some cool tips in this episode. You might want to check this one out. We are also on all your standard podcasting platforms. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube. We do stream Dungeons and Dragons every single Sunday night. You can find that at twitch.tv/DGOnline, as well as on the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@DadGamingOnline. And we do have ways for you to get in touch with us.
Yeah, we got our email, mastersofpenandpaper@gmail.com. You can send us a little doobly-doo email that will let us know, your thoughts on the podcast, or
send us some post-pod questions.
Yeah, post-pod questions, systems that you want us to check. Adventure that you had your last session, that would be great.
Let us know your stories, your D&D stories, your DM. What was your first time DMing? Would love to hear that.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. We also have a Discord. The link will be down in the description. We have a nice little tabletop RPG kind of channel going right now, and it's getting a little traction.
We're getting there.
I'm liking it.
People are posting. I saw some character ideas in there and some campaign ideas. Lots of
That's
cool
a
stuff.
pretty good place for you to interact with us. We are always, hidden in the Discord mess
around.
there. Yeah. Other than that, yeah.
That's it. That's all. So episode 16 will be coming at you next. Make sure to tune in for that. And other than that, we do appreciate you. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. See you.